You are listening to Neurosalience, the OHBM podcast.
Welcome to the Organization for Human Brain Mapping Neurosalience podcast. I'm your host, Peter Banatini, and here I interview neuroscientists and discuss their work, as well as the latest developments, issues, and controversies in the field of brain mapping. And today I chat with the leaders of the OHBM Open Science Special Interest Group, or OSSIG, OSSIG, as it's called. And I have with me 5 guests, Aki Nicolaitis, who's the chair. He's from the Child Mind Institute, and he served on the Student Postdoc Special Interest Group. He also is a research scientist at Child Mind in New York City. His research focuses on using advanced statistical methods to better understand psychopathology, brain organization, and cognitive performance. Aki's work in neuroscience, psychology, and machine learning has been featured in over 20 peer-reviewed publications. Second guest is Janine Bijsterbosh, or Bijsterbosh, chair-elect of the OSSIG. So Janine is an assistant professor in Computational Imaging section of the Department of Radiology at the Washington University in St. Louis. The Personomics Lab, as she calls it, is headed by her and aims to understand how brain connectivity patterns differ from one person to the next by studying a personalized connectome. Using open data resources such as the Human Connectome Project and the UK Biobank, the Personomics Lab adopts cutting-edge analysis techniques to study functional connectivity networks and their role in behavior, performance, mental state, disease risk, treatment, response, and physiology. In addition, she wrote a textbook on functional connectivity analysis, which was published by Oxford University Press in 2017. My third guest is Katie Botenhorn, and she's the secretary of the OSSIG. She's from Florida International University, and she's interested in how large-scale brain network topology varies between and within individuals over the course of everyday life. She's especially interested in how hormonal fluctuations with menstrual cycle and hormonal contraceptives contribute to this variability, and how this differs with respect to changes in sleep, exercise, and stress. And Joanna Beyer is a secretary-elect. She's currently at the University of Melbourne in Australia, and she's the treasurer-elect of the OHBM Australia chapter of OHBM, and an active member in the OHBM Sustainability and Environmental Group. This year is also her second year behind the scenes helping to organize the OHBM Brain Hack. And Joanna, who's originally from Munich, Germany, has a background in psychology, neuroscience, and computer science, and was awarded the Melbourne Research Scholarship in 2018 to pursue her PhD at the University of Melbourne. Her PhD work is focusing on creating a normative model of the brain from neuroimaging data to study depression, and on a method to harmonize side effects in large neuroimaging data sets. In addition to her passion for her work, Joanna loves dancing, rock climbing, and computer science, and cats. My fifth guest is Melvin Selim-Ate, and there's a new position of Inclusivity Officer, which really focuses on expanding the scope of who has access to and how they have access to all that OHBM offers. He's at the Middle East Technical University of Ankara, Turkey, and his focus is mostly on the explainability of deep learning. You have deep learning that produces these results. How do you actually explain, how do you know what it's doing? So in this podcast, we cover a lot of ground. It's a really outstanding discussion, not only of everything that the Open Science SIG does, but what open science means in general. It's much more than just sharing data and sharing code. It's including different cultures, different people from different countries, and also underrepresented groups within any culture as well. The more diverse and inclusive we can be, the more robust we'll be. And we talk a lot about that as well. So enjoy the podcast. Thank you. Welcome to OHBM Neurosalience podcast. I'm your host, Peter Banatini. And as you know, we have a great lineup today of leaders in the OHBM Open Science Special Interest Group. And we're going to talk about everything that they're about and open science in general and what it means and exactly what they're doing as far as within the context of OHBM. So just to begin, I'd just like to just go around and briefly say everyone's name and then have you introduce yourself so that the listeners can sort of associate your voice with your name. So let's begin with the current chair of Open Science SIG, Aki Nicolaitis.
Nicolaitis, yeah. Hi, I'm Aki Nicolaitis. Yeah, I'm the chair of the SIG this year.
And then Janine Bijsterbosh, is that right?
Yes, that's right. Hi, I'm Janine Bijsterbosh. I'm chair-elect of the Open SIG, so trying to learn the ropes from Aki. And I'm recording in St. Louis at the moment.
Okay, and Aki's in New York, by the way. I think. Whatever. Yeah. And then Katie Bottenhorn.
Yep, you got it. Bottenhorn. Hi, I'm Katie Bottenhorn. I'm the current secretary of the Open Science SIG. And I just recently relocated from Miami, Florida to Gainesville, Florida. So the Sunshine State.
Cool. And then Joanna Baer.
Yes. Hi, I'm Joanna, and I'm joining from Melbourne. I'm the secretary-elect of the Open Science SIG.
Okay. And Melvin Selim Ete, do you just go by the whole name? And
Mel is fine. Melvin is also fine.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm the diversity and inclusivity person in Open Science SIG.
Okay. All right. Great. All right. Well, thanks again for coming. And first, I was trying to figure out a good question to open up with, and actually we've had a previous podcast with an open science group in Leipzig. You know, there's a lot of these local open science groups that are sort of starting up and starting their thing, and this is this group though is a little bit broader in scope, and it's the OHBM Open Science Special Interest Group, and there's been a lot of discussion about open science, and I was just reading Tal Yurkoni's blog about how he hates the term open science, even though he's a huge promoter of open science. He hates it because no one really knows exactly what it means. So how and any of you can just jump in. How would you define open science in its fullest definition?
I would say that open science is a sort of ever-expanding set of terms about how we define how science needs to change in order for us to really accomplish what the mission statement of science is, which is to, add to the book of human knowledge for all people. And as I think starting basically in 2010, with the sort of psychologists discovering the replication crisis, we found that even though science seems like such a sort of cut and dry thing, it is a communal effort, and it's subject to the same sort of psychological biases and mismatch and mismanagements that can happen in any collection of people, but that has sort of different implications for our work, in that it means that the actual quality of what we're saying in our science might not be exactly what we wish that it was. But the term, I definitely agree with Tal's point that it's a vague term, but it's like saying science is a vague term, or saying some, it's broad and it's multifaceted. But I don't think that either of those things are a problem. I think they're part of the strength of open science, is that it is broad and it is multifaceted. It's about more than just open data. It's also about inclusivity and accessibility. and community resource management and long-term scientific planning. So there's a lot of pieces in there.
Yeah.
If anyone else wants to jump in on that.
Yeah, just to build a tiny bit, in addition to all of the lovely things Aki just said, one of the things that we've really been focusing on lately is kind of democratizing science and knowledge, and the dissemination and collaboration thereof. And so open science kind of starts with the idea that maybe we should take a better or more in-depth look at the way that we're doing science and allow others to do the same with like open data, open code, open publications. But one thing that's been on my mind kind of just in the last few weeks and months is like open to whom? And I think it's really easy to think that open, like if you just make it available on the internet, it's open. But I think one thing that we've been focused on, especially like last year and this year, is answering that like everyone, but that's a pretty big ask. So I think kind of Aki's note on inclusivity and accessibility is really paramount these days.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I also think I hope that we at some point get to the point where we don't differentiate between open science and science anymore. Like there's this great blog post saying like, when will we finally call open science science? And so we hopefully at some point, like it will just be clear that science is open science. And like that everything, like we do all these things that we want to happen, like share data, make data publicly available, share code. Yeah, that's what I hope.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. No, I definitely I like your definitions. I sort of the thoughts that occurred to me here was like, I look at the field as sort of like this network, and the generally the better connected the network in every single way, the variety of people, the variety of approaches and the data, the more robust it becomes, and the more quickly it advances. It's funny. Yeah. I mean, you look at, the past century, science was just sort of, these elite people in their institutes writing papers that that only a few people read, and things kind of went really slowly. And now having all this process a lot more transparent, I mean, I think that just allows much more rapid progress, and it's good for everyone. So okay, so how? So as far as the history of the Open Science SIG, I know that a few years back, OHBM sort of expanded. They had council, they had the program committee, but then all the SIGs sort of started opening up. So do any of you were you around sort of in the field when the Open Science SIG started, and can you mention what motivated it, at least at the beginning? Like what's the history in some sense?
Yeah. I can speak a little bit about the history. I joined Child Mind Institute in 2016, and Cameron Craddock was at Child Mind Institute at the time, and Daniel Margulies had been there, and Satra Ghosh was a collaborator of ours, and Pierre Bellick had been there and was a collaborator of ours. So, those people, along with Nolan Nichols and J.B. Pauline, and a lot of, David Kennedy, and a lot of other sort of key players, were kind of key to starting up the OSSIG in 2016, but they had been building off of several years already of work that they had been doing, sort of throwing the first, brain hack, for example, happened in 2013 in Seattle, and the first open science room happened in 2014 in Hamburg when OHBM was in Hamburg. But there was a lot of, when I started grad school in 2010, there was a lot of talk already of the replication crisis at that moment, right? And that would have trickle down effects over the next few years that would lead to the generation of these kinds of events. Yeah. Okay.
So it's sort of recent, but and actually, yeah, I like your web pages. It looks like they're not part of the OHBM. They're sort of a link out to your own web pages, and it's really nicely organized. And I was looking at, the first thing that struck my mind is your what you promote. So it's open data, code, and publishing. And I always think, okay, so it's one thing promoting it and generally encouraging it. So can any of you go into detail as to how you like what you're doing to maybe promote open data and code? Are there, there's many other groups like, Russ Poldrack has these sites for, actual sharing of code or data. What as far as is what you do to promote that?
We're less like say like OSF or Open Neuro or something like that. Our role in the SIG is really one of like facilitating a cultural shift in the OHBM community and disseminating the best practices and perspectives about open science through the community. So we're not like actually there providing those open science resources for people. We're trying to, so like sort of how I got into open science, for example, was I went to a brain hack. I made a pull request to NiLearn to fix some documentation English mistakes. That was my first, like, so it's like about providing those first opportunities for people in a brain hack to sort of get involved. Yeah.
Okay. I actually think that, one always wonders, it's a big question of how you change a culture, and certainly having these warning signs of like, wait a second, our data is not reproducible, that helps. But even still, like for instance, at the NIH, I try to get people to contribute to a database of like, across protocols or whatever. And people always, you still have this sense where people like will say, well, why do I need to share my data? Because it's my data. I paid dearly for it. I wrote my grant, I did my research, and I need to benefit from it. And it's sort of like this, mindset in a lot of scientists who are otherwise pretty open-minded, that they feel like there's not any benefit to them, even in the short run, at least. So it's maybe trying to foster long-term thinking versus short-term thinking. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, if you've encountered any pushback to open science.
I definitely have. There's a few people at my institution that are still the holdouts on like, well, if we share our data, won't it get scooped? Like, especially when it comes to niche data sets, when you have this like either really hard to reach population or like really novel thing that you've done, I can see the hesitation in sharing and stuff. But I think that's one of the reasons that we like having the open science room during the main conference, just in pre-2020 times. It was kind of just a space with like a pretty loose schedule where anything can happen and everyone's invited all the time, and it's just a persistent place for people to like discuss these sorts of ideas, to engage their curiosity if they're not sure they're like here for the open science thing. And we always bring in some of the projects from the hackathon to present, to kind of like share the rumblings and get people interested if they weren't already. But I think that's one of our like our main missions is just like sharing and educating and making open science more accessible to everybody.
Yeah. Well, let's.
Go ahead. Sorry, I was just going to say your point that you make though about open science being counter to career success is probably the biggest stumbling block that open science faces in terms of becoming synonymous with science. We live in this publisher perish era, and if it costs you, X amount of time to make one paper and X times 1.5 to make an open science best practices paper, you'll be beat out for tenure positions every time, compared to everybody else, even assuming you are working just as hard and everything like that. That issue alone, is one that we as an entire society need to struggle with. This is not like a open science committed people need to address this problem before we share our data. It's which is true. We need to figure out how to develop models of career success in academia while following best practices of open science. But more broadly, if we're all in agreement that, you know, sharing of data and findings and protocols and all of these things is essential for maximizing the development of our scientific fields over the next 100 years, let's take that long view, right? Then why are we holding off on adopting something new? Why is it that tenure committees are still not recognizing huge contributions to open science projects as just as seminal, if not more so, than a science paper or Nature paper?
And I think it's kind of encouraging that the shift is happening at the top already in very small ways. Like the idea that funding bodies are pushing for like data openness and even making it in some cases a requirement in the funding mechanism itself, I think is really encouraging, because it means that at least in the most practical sense, the value is being seen. If you spend lots of money collecting this data, you wouldn't want it to stay siloed over here. It would make much more sense if it was accessible to many more people. And I think it's just, I totally agree with Aki. It is really frustrating as someone who is like early in her career that's trying to like do all the things, do them well, make sure that my like code data, et cetera, are all accessible, but also, you know, build a resume and build a career. I think that that's a struggle, but I am encouraged by seeing that like it's maybe glacially shifting, but it is shifting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with you both. I also feel the incentive structure is not yet there. But I also think that, like what Katie said, is more like a top-down revolution, right? Like journals pushing towards it. But I also see a lot of grassroots revolution, actually. Like a lot of young scientists are actually really interested in engaging in open science practices and like approach their supervisors saying, could we make our code accessible? Could we make our data accessible? And I think that's great, actually. That's very promising.
That's how it happened in our lab. It was a grassroots. There were a few graduate students who were really like pushing for it. I was like maybe the second or third on the bandwagon, but it is. I kind of like that it seems to be coming at the open science thing from both sides, because Joanna brings up a really great point.
Yeah, no, I like exactly your construct. So I mean, it's all about incentives. And it's either right bottom up or top down, sort of like either, or else also one could look at it as carrots or sticks, like, you know, top down, you know, sort of a stick saying, you know, you have to, you know, like for instance, the NIH is sort of having these policies, you know, and bottom up is sort of explaining to everyone how it's beneficial. And hopefully they'll meet in the middle, like, right, we're tenure committees. Yeah, say, look, this person's been promoting open science. That's a plus. And I think after, like, you know, probably a generation, like, you know, what's considered a generation in science, it will start to catch on even more. And I think it also helps not only that people share the data, but, you know, when you're sharing data, you actually, I think, also think about, you know, making it more shareable. Like, you know, if you write code, you want to make it better. If you have data, you want to sort of package it in a way that's usable. And so that helps the science too. So it's, it's always a question, and it's not going to change overnight. But everything you're doing is really important and good as far as that's concerned. Yeah, and this is sort of related to this question. So there have been papers on reproducibility in neuroimaging. That's sort of a crisis. I don't know if any of you want to mention that. Actually, in fact, I was just talking on a podcast with Ahmad Hariri about his paper of intercorrelation coefficient values being very low, and you know, how we can address that. How have those projects influenced the work? I mean, sort of to restate, I mean, was it influenced directly by the so-called crisis that we have? I mean, I think it's a good crisis and it's a solvable crisis, but was there a discussion of how to address that in particular? I don't know if anyone wants to jump in.
Anybody want to jump in on that? So I think a lot of us in the open science SIG in many ways come to the idea that, okay, open science is the future, and it's not necessarily through a single publication that makes us, you know, oh wow, everything needs to change. But I'll just say for myself, like, I did my PhD in cognitive neuroscience. I observed firsthand the number of degrees of freedom afforded to me in the process of finding what I found, right? And in that process, it becomes very, and also having some kind of recognition of the fact that just humans have internal biases. We have selection bias. We want to believe the results that lead to a publication more than we want to believe the results that lead to another file drawer, you know, paper that never gets published. And, you know, my work was in cognitive training. So I feel like I got to see this a lot, right? Small studies, large effect sizes, then failures to replicate with much higher quality studies, and then people talking about hidden moderators. It wasn't a question of maybe the reliability of the things that you're measuring is questionable, or maybe the methods that you're using to select your subjects is questionable, et cetera, et cetera. So that was kind of for me. And then all of these papers that get published and are getting a lot of attention, I feel like is, oh yes, you know, like this is free PR for us. You know, this is like people understanding how deeply problematic. I mean, if you just read any of John Ioannidis's work from Stanford, he makes it very clear that this is not a surface level issue. This is like a core issue of like existential threat to the entire concept of how we're aggregating knowledge over time, right? Yeah. Like if we're doing it very slow, if for every one step forward we take, or for every 5 steps forward we take 4 steps back, that's going to have a very different outlook for us 100 years from now than if for every one step forward we don't take a step back. That those two paths of scientific progress and human knowledge accumulation look very different over time. I'm a big sci-fi fan, so I like to think about, you know, what does the tech tree for human society look like 200 years from now? Yeah. And what are our roadblocks that we're facing to get to those places? Like, if say that in 200 years we know how to diagnose mental illness through the use of MRI, how did we get there?
Right. That's a really good way of thinking about it. Yeah.
I also think, like, yes, the open science movement was influenced by the reproducibility crisis, but also like definitely by the idea to make science more open and more accessible. I think that's another part of open science. And I actually wanted to say something about what Talia Coney said on his blog post, that he doesn't understand how these two like terms, diversity and reproducibility, like how they are linked. And like that, he says like there might be people who favor more one or the other, but like not both of them. And I think it's actually impossible to favor just one of them, because if you say you really want to make science reproducible, then that means you make it reproducible for everyone, not only people who have access to a MATLAB license or to an HPC or from an Ivy League university, but like really to everyone. You cannot say like I make it reproducible, but then just for this group of people. So in order for science to be reproducible, it actually has to be diverse, because it means that it's open to everyone. Yeah.
And I think that's true both on the back end once you've done the science, but also one thing we kind of forget sometimes, or we tend to forget, is on the front end. It's very difficult to study a group of people that you are not part of without like listening to that group of people, or like having some representation from that group of people. And so it kind of takes it just steps back in time, the problem that Joanna is talking about, just doing science at all. If we're going to do it in a way that like truly benefits like humanity globally, has to be a global endeavor.
Yeah, that's a great stepping off point into our next point. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I think that, yeah, I mean, having it reproducible just to a select group of people with the right tools or whatever is not completely reproducible. You sort of want to, yeah, you want to advance, you want to use the diversity to advance the science, but then you first have to make it as open as possible. And for instance, just off the top of my head, the Connectome project, to me, that was pushed the field ahead 10 years, just because of all the reanalysis and all the deeper understanding of methods and things like that of that data set. But we can even do better. So let's actually start talking a little bit about inclusivity. Obviously, you have at the meeting, you have the brain hack and the open science room that are just sort of generally open. And we can talk maybe a little bit more about this because it's really an intriguing concept. But let's also talk about infrastructure restrictions, such as, for instance, we're up against these much larger geopolitical sort of issues like sites being blocked in China and Iran, and actually, even for Aperture, Pedro Valdez Souza is on the advisory board for that. He's constantly saying, look, we need to open up. We need to have more countries represented. And at Cuba, obviously, I can't even do a Zoom call with them because it's blocked. So how are you addressing or trying to address all of that? And it's certainly an important issue. So
it kind of goes back to what I was just mentioning about science is also true of this infrastructure problem. It's very hard to know even what problems you have to solve if your group is just people from North America and Europe, because we are not facing problems of technological accessibility that other countries are facing. And so I think some of these issues have become much more apparent in the last 2 years, 1 year and change, because being able to do everything virtually opens up a lot, but also exposes other issues, right? Like in-person travel is restricted by visas and kind of like the concrete geopolitical issues. And then I know one thought that I had, kind of a naive thought that I had last year, was like, oh, great, it'll be on the internet. Everyone can access it. That's just not quite true. And so one thing I think that was really helpful last year is we had a very diverse group of volunteers from like everywhere. And part of making our programming open included using different like websites and technologies for access in different parts of the world.
Okay. So like what technologies, because I'm actually, right, I'm we're up against, so I guess there's probably niche technologies that governments haven't sort of, identified and shut down in some sense or things like that. So, yeah.
We've been using Crowdcast as sort of like, we sort of set out to have inclusivity and zero risk of firewall of Iran or China, et cetera, being a problem for us. So we discussed, different options, and Crowdcast, which is what they used last year, allows us to basically stream all of our content for free to everybody all over the world. So you don't even need to be at OHBM. You don't need to be registered to OHBM to attend all of our events. And if you have sort of, for example, you're getting blocked because Google Firebase, which is what the OHBM is based on, is blocked in a certain country, you can still attend our content with that. So we've been addressing some of this just through technical means, trying to move in that direction. But there's always limitations on that. We would prefer for some things to be able to have like massive Zoom rooms, for example, and having different technological solutions for different groups of people also means that we have a technical burden while the event is running. That means that we're more likely to drop the ball on all sorts of different things as a result, updating the website, et cetera, putting the correct links in the correct places, making sure that the questions from the chat are getting to the moderators from this, platform to this other platform, et cetera. Yeah.
I mean, everyone has to expect it's never, that's the problem with whenever you try to do something a little bit more open and it's challenging, and there's always problems. So, and one should never just give up because, there's always going to be technical issues, and it's never going to be perfect, but it's better than nothing, and it's a lot better than nothing, actually. So,
I think Aki and Katie are being humble here because they were around last year already. I mean, I'm a newbie to the OSSIG, and one of the reasons why I applied to or why I ran for the position that I'm in right now is because I was just blown away by what the OSSIG did last year at OHBM. You know, we were all pushed to go virtual. It was a big scramble on all fronts, but I think the OSC really got it right in terms of, you know, all of the platforms that they use, in terms of having a lot of really engaging kind of group discussions and content. So I was really impressed with that, and we're hoping to kind of keep that momentum going and build on that this year and future years.
Well, let me ask more specifically, like how do you coordinate with OHBM? Do they have their own thing and then you figure out your own thing, or are you trying to influence? Are you all working together on the same page as far as what you're doing?
We have a lot of coordination this year. So I think last year, OHBM getting canceled in person caught everyone flat-footed, and it was like a scramble. And you know, Camille and Remy and Liza and Cass and Stefan, they like pulled through in an amazing amount of work, coordinated an amazing group of volunteers from the entire world. I mean, it was really like such a, kind of like gold standard of what the SIG can do. I don't know if we're going to be able to live up to be honest, but we're gonna give it our shot. But yeah, we are working in coordination with them. We meet. We now have a seat on council, like a non-voting seat on council. So we're in the council meetings. We're hearing what they're saying and what they're caring about. We're giving them feedback. We're talking to program. We're working with them. We're the tech task force. Katie is on as a liaison with the tech task force. So the development of the Sparkle platform for OHBM this year, we've been like following it very closely, step by step the whole way. And I think in general, the open science SIG and maybe the SIGs more broadly are becoming a little bit more incorporated into the overall programming of OHBM, as I think OHBM is 2/3 trainees, right? So it's early career researchers are the dominant thing. And when I was in the student postdoc SIG, that was kind of like our main message is like, listen, we should do some more stuff for the kids, so to speak, because yes. It's like most of the community is them. And yeah, so I think the SIGs are getting more integrated into OHBM more broadly.
Okay.
Sorry, really quick. That kind of speaks to something that I really like about this community is that after OHBM 2020, there was an obvious, an intentional effort to incorporate more voices in the planning of OHBM 2021 and kind of making it definitely building on what we learned from last year. And I think that's really cool because now that we've been kind of forced to exist in this virtual space, this year we get to do it on purpose and we get to do it well. And I think that this sort of effort could really benefit us moving forward too, even once we're meeting in person again.
Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to go into that too as well. So as far as this is what you're doing so as far as what you're doing now, but what about the future? So is there talk about? I mean, how would you envision sort of a hybrid meeting or having both open access to what's going on versus being there in person? I mean, you can imagine, we'll eventually be in person, hopefully next year. And so what will what's your strategy if you've even had time to think about it yet then?
I have a lot of opinions, but if someone would like to go first, they should definitely do that.
Yeah, and this is with understood that it's all sort of maybe premature, but I'm kind of interested in general thoughts. Not obviously it's not a policy that you're doing or anything like that, right?
Yeah, well, my official, unofficial take on the matter is that I think that we've learned so much from offering programming virtually that we should not just disregard that knowledge once we've been able to meet in person again. Because like I mentioned a little bit earlier, one serious pro to existing in a virtual space is that there aren't visa issues in a virtual space, and there are fewer financial issues in a virtual space. Not that there aren't any at all, because broadband internet access is still not global and universal and affordable. But my personal vision is that we should just like coast on the momentum of having virtual programming, because we have really great technological solutions. Like Aki mentioned earlier, Crowdcast is a platform that we used for most of our programming last year and are planning to use again this year. And it's a little bit challenging to coordinate people from all over the globe in a schedule to like talk at this time and like have these discussions live in a way that includes as many people as possible. And I actually see the hybrid meeting kind of addressing those points a little bit. There can be a little bit more flexibility of schedule when you have everybody in the same room, right? And you don't have to like make sure that the person you're trying to reach is listening and ready when you're trying to talk. But I think that allowing for a virtual link to remain is really important. And I think that we already have some of the technological solutions that will allow us to do that in a really great way moving forward.
Cool.
Also, I think like no, you go.
I think in some ways a fully hybrid meeting is harder than either a fully in-person meeting or a fully virtual meeting. And I wonder, I mean, of course, we want to record all of, if we go back to an in-person meeting, we want to record all the sessions, make them available, ideally as openly available as possible to anyone who wants to, kind of isn't able to make it or wants to go back and watch things afterwards. I wonder if the future, it's hard to give people who are attending something virtually that is happening in person for some other people, the kind of floor space and the ability to engage. And I wonder whether a kind of biannual kind of switching between, you know, having it virtual 1 year to like get the most of making it accessible, because it's beyond the cost and the there's also it becomes much more accessible to people with childcare responsibilities and people, younger people with tight schedules. And so I wonder if a biannual kind of rhythm where we have it in person in 1 year, and then of course we record it and we make it available afterwards, but then also, or even stream it potentially if we could, but then having keeping the virtual theme going, because I think we're learning how to do it really well, and there's a lot of benefits from that also.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So that was basically what I wanted to say, that we shouldn't drop the ball on the virtual meetings, because they offer such a great platform for inclusivity. Like there's so many reasons why people can't travel, like Janine said, like having small kids or whatever, tight schedule. So I think this is really important.
Yeah. So it actually, I mean, to me, it also seems that virtual meetings are sort of opening up how we think of meetings in some sense. I mean, there's nothing to say that it has to be like at a certain time. I mean, it seems that you could almost imagine having a rolling, you know, OHBM sort of series that just kind of goes throughout the year in some sense. I mean, you know, there were some interesting, you know, creative solutions of, you know, there's Twitter, the OHBM X meeting with happened one day across the entire globe. But you could also imagine having, you know, just continuous, you know, updates on topics and talks that just kind of keep on going, and then having the meeting as sort of like a you know, a punctuation of, you know, okay, this is where we're all going to maybe chat about it and whatever. But yeah, it opens up the field of redefining what you think of meetings. I mean, of course, we have time zone issues, and you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be perfectly real time for everyone. You could have chat, you know, you could have ongoing discussions, you know, who knows? But anyway, it just opens up all kinds of opportunities, I think, and just sort of redefine what it means to have a meeting. So
I totally agree with that. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
There's a lot of opportunities.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think now that you know, we're able to meet in person with at least some people again, there's also, like, virtual doesn't necessarily mean sitting sadly by yourself at a computer and listening passively. You know, I'm planning a watch party for OHBM virtual this year with my lab, so I'm looking forward to actually watching some of the talks together and getting to have at least some of those discussions, because I think that's actually where you learn the most or get the most ideas, is when you discuss what you've just listened to with people around you. So I think maybe local watch parties, or and maybe that can grow into more of a Midwest watch party, or a US watch party, and a Europe watch party, or that sort of thing. I'm excited about those ideas as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I get all my information about the meetings basically on who I talk to. Sometimes I do my best to look at it, but then there's always somebody who says, "Oh, I saw this talk," and I never would have looked at that. So it's I mean, there's so much with human communication as far as that's concerned that's so valuable. Yeah.
One of the things that I can add, that in addition to local watch parties, there will be some sort of extension of local OHBM groups in their language, so they can incorporate with the global. So it will be easy to use the native language. Then it can be possible to virtually connect in English and then have some connection. So for the future, it might be another opportunity.
That's really interesting idea. Having, potentially with AI, you could have real-time translation, or even, somebody who's to have that virtually. Yeah. I like that idea.
Because language is one of the barriers in geographically. Not everyone is quite fluent in English, but yes, they might be fluent in speaking or giving speech in certain topic, but not casual conversation. So it's always a barrier, it's a challenge. So providing tools to overcome this would be useful.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. I mean, it's sort of, it's both fortunate but also unfortunate that English has been sort of like the language, and I definitely feel it's holding, in some sense it helps, but in some sense it holds things back, because there are so many if you want to get outside the Western, European, whatever culture, you have to expect that people do science, and they don't necessarily learn English as well. So, and that's so I totally agree with you. That's a great idea. I think that and how to actually do it though is another challenge. But I like the idea also of trying to find groups, like you can imagine, you can identify groups like in areas that are underrepresented. And try to have a grassroots movement to identify people, and sort of try to foster these local, maybe have these tiny, even local communities of OHBM where those sort of seeds are planted in that regard.
And I think that makes our meeting more sustainable on like multiple levels. I'm just thinking about what Janine said about having kind of like a rhythm of virtual and hybrid and in-person meetings. And I think that it could be a really great opportunity to not only make our meetings more sustainable, because if many people aren't taking long flights to get to the meetings, that's just an inherent win for the environment, but sustainable in a sociocultural way as well. I think building grassroots movements that are talking about science in a way that is best for them helps sustain the community and the discussions and kind of the movement of knowledge in like a very broad sense that I think is really valuable.
Yeah. Yep.
One thing I just want to also bring up though is the danger of sometimes these diversity inclusivity efforts are focused on putting extra work and burden on the people themselves who we are trying to loop in, right? So it's like, it's one thing to say, yeah, the local communities should be organizing more to integrate more into OHBM. But that's kind of expecting more work on the people who we're actually just trying to loop into the conversation. The conversation, I think, also should be considering how could we, as sort of the, more, Western European center of OHBM, be doing a better job of reaching out and accessing these other groups. And as a member of the Open Science SIG, one of the things that I've thought a lot is that geographical diversity, geographical inclusivity is perhaps one of the biggest, most difficult challenges that we all face, and that has a variety of different faces. It looks like, oh, all of the people who are practicing open science using Python, those are the ones who are like Northern European and or European and Western, et cetera. And then China, everybody uses MATLAB or something, for example, right? So that's an issue that the open science SIG, we're too focused on Python. We're too focused on open science software. We're not focused enough on inclusivity of people who are using different software packages. But also like the programming, the OHBM programming, it's all in English, and it's not translated. The subtitles, there's no like Japanese subtitles or Chinese subtitles or whatever, but it would be really helpful. We could I'm sure that based on our understanding of how the community, how many members are in each community, we can identify which are the 5 languages that we should be translating all of the talks into through some kind of paid service. I would get that I'm brainstorming, but these are the kinds of questions I think we should be thinking about when talking about geographical inclusivity and diversity. Is like, what are the roadblocks that we ourselves are putting up that are preventing it, rather than like, what additional work can we expect from other people to get more integrated?
Yeah, that's a great point. I totally agree. It seems like a low-hanging fruit too, and relatively cheap to find, people to translate, 5 different languages, like you said.
And I think we're in maybe the best place to do that we've ever been as a society, like with like improving automatic captioning services and improving like awareness of like how best to make things accessible. I think that now is as good a time as any, right? To kind of take this issue by the horns and really, I don't know that, I don't mean to say solve it, but like improve on our offerings in this way. I think it's a really neat opportunity that we should really take advantage of.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I keep on thinking back that, science is this sort of glue that connects cultures. I mean, we have a common interest, and it's very universal. And and it really, I think, is a good influence for a lot of other things in the world too, but as far as that's concerned. So having ways of, and in the short run gain, it may not be immediate. It might not be an immediate sort of benefit, but it will. It seems like any good thing, it will build, and it's hard to know exactly how it will build. But that's exciting as far as that's concerned. So did you? So you wrote a paper. You mentioned that on. You wrote a manuscript. I guess we covered a lot of on inclusive virtual conferences. Did you want to talk about that a little bit, to the extent that, obviously, maybe we talked about most of that, but I don't know if there's any points you brought up in your manuscript that are worth discussing further. And so, when did you write that manuscript? Was it recently?
Yeah, it was basically just now. Okay. And one of our, like Remy, he got invited by Neuron. And then he basically made it an open science project, which was really great. Like we have now, I think, over 170 authors, and like the last author is the community, which is the Brainer community, which is really great. And also the manuscript basically, or the paper has now been published, and it touches on all the things that we've already discussed, but it also comes with an extension, online extension of a Jupyter book that is still maintained, and we add on content there. It's also like the Jupyter book has glossaries in different languages, so we try like this language thing, like translating stuff, make this happen. So it's definitely worth checking out, and like also checking every once in a while, because it's updated and maintained.
Okay, so is there like a website associated? I mean, is there a link, or maybe I could try to put that in?
There is, the link to the Jupyter book is in the manuscript, and the manuscript is called Brain Hack: Developing a Culture of Open, Inclusive, Community-Driven Neuroscience. Okay. I don't have the link right here, but
where is that published in?
In Neuron.
In Neuron. Okay, that's what's in. Okay, yeah, great. All right.
And to make matters even better, there's an additional manuscript published by, currently in press, I think it's under review, written by a lot of the members of the Open Science SIG from last year, that build specifically on this issue of the virtual spaces. And I think we've touched on a lot of the points that are made in the manuscript, but I think those two pieces kind of go hand in hand in not only like reintroducing in some ways what it is that we're doing to the world, but also like trying to help people build on the lessons that we've learned in the past year and change.
Okay, great. I'll make sure I mention that and advertise that as well. So just to maybe shift gears slightly. So I noticed that you had a new role of a inclusivity officer this year. And that would be Melvin. So how has this allowed you to better consider inclusivity as part of the events associated with the meeting and with what you do? So what is that role, and what do you envision it?
Yeah. My understanding from this role is to be the link between diverse audience and the organizers of the event. We have our Open Science Room and Brain Hack. So those events are being organized according to the needs of several diverse groups. So I was the link between them. I was listening and being the connection between these groups. There are several groups that we've been in touch, such Black and Neuro, Disabled in STEM, and several other queer organizations. So we want to enhance their representation and enhance their voices during our events. And we care about accessibility a lot. So we want to make sure that we are having closed captioning on all the video materials or virtual live interactions. So we want to make these events as reachable, as understandable as possible. And I'm the link between the several groups.
All right. Well, and it's funny because it seems like for years it's sort of a blind spot, I think, in the community. We're all like just thinking about our research, and then we think about our university's research and just the field, but we don't think about, most people don't naturally just think about, oh, how can I engage diverse groups to everyone's benefit? Yeah. And the logistics of that, that's so important. And I think once you realize it, it's like, wow, this is a huge problem and it's a huge challenge. It's worth doing.
And also it's difficult for underrepresented groups to speak up and find a place to express themselves. So providing that space and mentioning that it's a safe space for you to be yourself and do your science and use your words however you like. So mentioning that is like first step of with just inviting them.
Yeah, and that's good to know. That's good to know that one would hope that the whole meeting is sort of a safe space, but at least having this as a start to sort of be, to foster this sort of sense that you can really sort of, express and share our experiences that sometimes we're not as comfortable sharing, in the context of the meeting. Yeah. That's awesome.
We're also brainstorming with several people from Brain Hack, and they have experience on organizing several local events, and using that envision, we are trying to reach out geographically. So far, we've reached out to some people from Brazil and some representation from Africa. They're joining us this year, but there will be also much more representation we're hoping to get.
That is great. So that's with the Brain Hack, really. So they're reaching out. How are they?
For the OHBM Brain Hack, the upcoming.
Yeah. So how are they? Just out of curiosity, I mean, I think that just thinking of the logistics of that. I mean, how are they doing that? Like, are they just simply contacting them and saying, "Hey, log in and let's just find a common thing to work on"? I mean, is it just simply including people and fostering this discussion, or is there anything further that they're doing to help accommodate the other groups? Like, like I can imagine, like if I'm trying to reach out, you know, I wouldn't even know. Like for instance, if I were in BrainHack and I'm like, okay, how do I reach out to a group in Africa? I don't know who I'd contact or.
There's several organizations listed, so we're trying to reach them. There's several groups that are actively on the internet. They have Twitters or several social media, so to connect. So what we're trying to do to reach them and spread the word.
That's great. That's great.
We've done some work in trying to make it that BrainHack is not something that's just for people who've been to BrainHack before. That this is a difference between how BrainHack is in person versus how BrainHack is virtually. You can have as many people as you want virtually, but it's really a space limited event when it's in person. So the move to digital has been a nice boom for the inclusivity element of our work in that regard, and letting people know you don't have to be a pro hacker. You don't have to even really know how to code to come to a BrainHack and to do really, to make a valuable contribution. And if you come from a low income country or a middle income country, or you just find yourself that you are not going to be able to pay, we're trying to make it very clear, like there's not going to be any barrier. You just contact us, we'll waive the fee, and you can feel free to join. There's no cost to you to get access to this community.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I've always loved BrainHack. I mean, initially, I think a lot of people are like, "Oh, what's this?" And the idea that there's no set projects and there's no real goals, but you sort of bring people together and they come up with ideas. And I think it's getting better and better every year. And like you said, having this virtual presence, and then once again, BrainHack could be something that isn't limited to a certain time. It could just be somewhat continuous potentially. I mean, I know that there's been BrainHack groups around the world and meetings, but even having a continuous forum for just at this low level of sort of like, you're trying to both find interesting problems and find solutions at the same time is really powerful, and also helps include people on the whole process and identifies things that we might be missing. Yeah.
One of the news. Oh, sorry. Really quick. Good news that space exists. Some of the people who organized the BrainHack in Rome, before the OHBM meeting a few years ago, have made a persistent virtual space for like ongoing BrainHacks. So it's the brainchild, pun ever so intended, of Katja Hoyer and Roberto Toro. And I don't have the link on the top of my head, but I will make sure that I send it to you so that it can be included, because I think that that's a really neat boon of the virtual spaces.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I'll try to include all that information to the best I can in how this is written up in that regard as well. So I mean, are there any? So as far as before I go on a little bit more with the hackathon, it sort of also occurred to me that just general outreach. And that's what I'm trying to do with this podcast in general. I mean, the whole public gets this, but it seems that there could also be a lot more work towards just outreach, engaging the public with letting people know what OHBM does. I don't know if that is in the domain of this group or not, but giving public lectures, like OHBM used to have, once or twice I think they did it, just a public lecture. Just because who knows, that could inspire someone in high school or whatever.
Yeah, so we have actually an outreach channel. So we kind of connect on Mattermost. I think that's the Open Science 6 space. But then we have an outreach channel that was actually made to kind of promote the paper, but it has like developed into outreach in general. And like one thing that we just did is make a video where we had like 5 questions, and everybody who joined recorded themselves answering them in their language. And then we had subtitles so that also people who do not speak German or French can actually, so English subtitles. And we are going to probably, I think it's already on YouTube, like just showcasing what BrainHack is, what we do, and a little bit about the community. These are just, it's also like, I think a lot of people are really interested in, it's a fun activity doing these things. So that's why we're also doing.
Yeah. I mean, even once we do have real meetings in the future, just trying to do something at the city you're at, is kind of fun in that regard too. But Yeah. Well, great. This is great. I mean, I'm yeah, it's wonderful. I really think that hopefully everyone listening to this will be completely convinced that that what you're doing is a long time coming and actually really important. So let's just, I mean, on so many levels, not only for the quality of science, but the engagement of everyone and helping the world in general. But let's go back to the hackathon, just really quickly. So, are there any particular projects that you've done in the past, or that sort of came out of this, that aside from engaging people, which is an end in itself, are there any things that have been useful? Not, I wouldn't say even useful, because there's different definitions of that word, but just that people have used, or things that are particularly unique as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, so I think just saying the typical brain hack project does not exist. It's so diverse, and I think that's the great thing about brain hack. But a couple of projects that I think are worth mentioning is, so one is Braindr, which is I think one of my favorite that came out of a brain hack, and it's basically Tinder for neuroscience. So if you go to the website, you swipe left or right to indicate whether a neuroimage is clean or corrupted.
That's awesome.
Yes, it's very fun, and it's basically harnessing the communities, kind of the people in the community to clear large neuroimaging data sets, and it's really fun. And there's also a little competition, because you get scores, and then you can compete against people that also join. And then another project that I think is worth mentioning is that, or projects that are worth mentioning are those that do not include coding, because we also have those actually. So there was this one project called Open Brain Consent, which was about developing a consent form template for the collection and sharing of human neuroimaging data. And I think this is worth mentioning, because we want to encourage people who are maybe new to coding or not so familiar with coding to also join. We also have those projects, and we need these people, and we really want them to be included. Yeah, and the project that we were going to do this year, I guess that depends a bit on the community, because they're all community driven, right? The idea is that people join and submit projects. So this is a call out to the listeners. If you have any cool idea, just register and join. And yeah, what I also wanted, I think that's important to say, if you submit a project, don't think that you have to need to have the answers for everything. The project lead is basically just providing the idea, and then people join and you work together. So just, to make this clear, because it might be impeding people, because they think, oh no, I don't know, I have an idea, but I don't know, I have no idea how to solve this. You don't have to know how to solve it. That's the idea, you solve it together.
Yeah, that is great. And it seems like there's so many, I mean, off the top of my head, it seems like there's so many ideas that could be related to, I love the Braindr concept. That whole concept of even trying to use that to curate the abstracts, or to sort of, what's, to get a sense even of the judgment of, what abstract is good or whatever, or even, whatever, or even I like to get a sense, for instance, when you're at a real meeting, you see a whole bunch of people standing around an abstract, you're like, oh, I'll check that out, for better or for worse. But I mean, having that information, or the more popular abstracts, and how is this changing in real time, or whatever, it could be kind of cool too, or even curation of other ways too. That
so good news on that front. Braindr kind of gave rise to a whole platform called Swipes for Science, which is, it provides a boilerplate for exactly that, is using the sort of the Braindr idea however you want to use it. I know somebody was using it for diffusion weighted imaging quality control recently, and if you QC this many images, you get to be an author on the paper, which I think is a really cool way to, I guess, in on the one hand, it gets people to help you do quality control, which I don't think is anybody's favorite thing to do. But on the other hand, it kind of does help democratize science, and I love it. But if you want that platform for another thing, good news, it's available, and it's pretty user-friendly to set up. So
that is great. That's cool. That's very cool. I don't know if you had any other project, but that's awesome. I mean, just in itself, I mean, that could be so much fun, and further engaging people and actually helping people as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, there's a lot of projects that currently exist, and you kind of look at them and you're like, wow, that's a really amazing polished thing, you know, that have been contributed to through multiple brain hacks over time. So it's like there's a history. So for example, like NiPipe, NiLearn, you know, people are making pull requests to these like over time repeatedly, or, you know, porting something from one language into another, et cetera. So it's like there's also a lot of a lot of the tools that everyone's used to using, or a lot of people are used to using, that the brain hack is helping develop in many different ways, documentation wise or additional functionality, etc.
That's how I got into this whole thing, is by like doing the like little babyest of pull requests on NiPipe to try to like make some of the AFNI tools more accessible to people who just use NiPipe. So I think that that's a really great point that Aki brought up, is like there's the polished things that like just keep churning on and on at brain hacks. And then there are the silly things. I have a personal love for the silly things. We spent a hackathon making little emojis with people's faces on them one time. And like, is that advancing science? Maybe, in a like weird, indirect sociocultural sort of way. Is it fun? Absolutely. Did I learn how to make GIFs? Also, yes. So there's like no end to the beauty of the brain hack.
Yeah, there's a lot of creative people, and sort of fostering that is only a good thing, and letting it and having outlets for it is awesome. So that's perfect. I like that. I'm going to be paying more attention to that. Yeah. So just to, you know, might as well, we're getting a little bit short on time, so we're just wrapping up a little bit. But how do you think? So obviously we've gone over a lot of these points, but so what do you think? How can you picture science in general, or open science, in how ideally it should evolve, like in the next 10 years or longer? I mean, how do you envision, you know, what's your goal that you're shooting for in the concept of open science? It's sort of, yeah.
That's a big question, but I'll give you some thoughts. I mean, I would personally, in science as a whole, I would personally like to see more agreement and more team science. I think, you know, I think our field is mature enough that we can start to come to a consensus on some things. That there's certainly, you know, I think part of the challenge with replicability crisis and things like that is that there's so many permutations of what is essentially a very similar processing pipelines, but there's just like so many little decisions and little permutations within that. And I think as a community, we're far enough and we understand things well enough to at least start thinking about a consensus or setting some standards. And that doesn't mean that there can't be any new methods, or that we all have to agree on one specific pipeline, but like reducing the complexity from, you know, hundreds or even thousands of different permutations to maybe like 3 pipelines or 5 pipelines that we can pick from. I think that would be amazing. And to me, you know, the era of the 40 patients, 40 controls comparison study with just like one modality is probably behind us. And I think we're, you know, data sets and studies are going to be bigger. They're going to involve different modalities, or maybe even looking at the brain at different scales. And so for that, we can only achieve that by having bigger teams and bringing in more different people with different expertises and more diverse kind of ideas and backgrounds. And so I'm really excited to go into that direction in science as a whole. And I think open science is hopefully creating that community and that platform for us to get there.
Yeah. It does seem like what you mentioned, there's this tension between having everyone do their own thing, you know, very different, but versus a consensus. You certainly don't want to, you know, have a consensus that's premature or not flexible. You want to have it dynamic, but you also, it does help to have some sort of to make things easier for everyone to have a common platform. I mean, that's why, you know, SPM was made and other platforms, and that's just one example, but there's always this balance. I mean, there's something could come out of nowhere and say, this might be better. And like having a mechanism for finding a consensus and being flexible at the same time. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, a consensus can evolve. A consensus isn't fixed, but I think if we can I would like to see is putting more effort into like trying to agree rather than disagree, like having those discussions and finding those points where we can move forward from, and that doesn't mean not challenging things, but asking good questions and relating more of the science that we do to other papers and other parts of science, I think is to me something that's really exciting.
Yeah.
I kind of want to just build on basically everything that Janine said, so thanks for that. I think that we're in a really great spot with kind of the beginning of the shift towards that sort of science. We have, like we mentioned earlier, several papers that are kind of like science of science papers that are showing us some of the blind spots in how we've been doing science and kind of point towards like how we need to improve in really concrete ways. I'm thinking specifically of like looking at effect sizes and sample sizes and like how many people do we actually need to answer the question we're trying to answer. And in that way, I'm really encouraged by projects like the ABCD project, which I think one of the early findings was effect sizes are extremely small. And like that is a finding in and of itself, because that can only help us move forward. But also to like harken back to something that each Aki and Melvin had said earlier, is that if we're gonna take one step forward and fewer steps back, we really need just bigger groups and bigger groups of people working together. And I think that we're in a great place to do that, and it's really exciting to me. My personal like favorite thing right now is just how much the brain changes in general, just like as you exist as a person. And we would have like no way of studying that if we didn't know things about effect sizes, if we hadn't like identified a reproducibility crisis, and if we hadn't been working in big teams of science. So I'm really encouraged by the direction that we're going right now.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, and I just hope that at some point when we say science, we will mean open science, so that this will become the standard.
Yeah. Aki,
I'm hopeful that in the next, 10, 20 years, it's kind of more common knowledge. Some of the issues about the replication crisis just kind of become, everybody kind of understands it. So say, for example, like one would be that the correlation between two things is limited by the reliability of those two things, right? So like you can't have a correlation of 0.9 between A and B if A and B themselves are less reliable than 0.9, just to like throw that out there, right? Like if A doesn't predict A above a certain amount, you can't have anything else predict it with that amount. I would love if like common knowledge about, like as a field, we all had common knowledge on what bias is, what variance is, what the trade-off between the two is, what overfitting means, how high dimensional statistics places particular challenges on the questions we're trying to answer, what regularization is, and how it so there's all this like statistical knowledge that I would love to see disseminated, and sort of perspective on how we are creating data and how we're answering questions about our data. But maybe more importantly, since that's more of an education problem, I would love to see something kind of like ABCD, but instead of collecting a massive data set, it's deeply phenotyping people with multiple samplings over time to get a better estimate of the reliability of each of our different neuroimaging measurement types, are phenotypic measurements. A lot of the things that me and my colleagues talk about is that everyone focuses a lot on the reliability of neuroimaging. So we're pushing the reliability of neuroimaging up and up and up, right? But the reliability of phenotypic measurements are really problematic. And if you want to discover biomarkers, or say for mental illness, or if you want to discover some kind of biomarker for how cognition is actually performed by the brain, you need to be maximizing the joint reliability of the two things that you're measuring. So how to both maximize phenotypic reliability and neuroimaging reliability, and which tasks to be choosing to measure cognitive performance, et cetera. I would love to see some kind of data set with, say 10 multiple acquisitions for many subjects of fMRI, structural MRI, phenotypic measurements, and understanding not only the reliability of each of those measurements, but also the variance in the observed correlations that are seen between the different modalities. So we understand a little bit more of like, okay, is this finding that we're seeing, is this above what we might be expecting just due to random chance? One of the things that like is important to understand is that as your reliability goes down, there's a thing called attenuation that happens. So like your effect sizes actually get smaller and smaller. So, there's some benefit to like actually trying to maximize reliability in the data that we're acquiring. And I think having like, there's a great data set in China where they have basically 30 people who've been scanned 10 times over the course of a month. It's one of my favorite data sets. I would love to see something like that exist in many modalities and with phenotyping included, so that we can get a little bit, maybe with even more people. I think creating those kinds of data sets that are a baseline, that they will allow for new work into reliability and reproducibility of science, of neuroscience to happen, that we currently actually can't do. We can't conduct it because we don't have that data yet.
Yeah, I like your idea of having the open science SIG sort of, have these, sort of foster these meta principles of like, the idea that of doing deep imaging of individual subjects to characterize them deeply with their phenotype and genotype, and also their variability, and have people understand, principles of good processing. Most people just approach it in a very, they start collecting data and they sort of figure out on the fly, and they triangulate between their group. Having sort of this top-down sort of, I can imagine writing, having your group sort of writing a position. I mean, there's a standards committee with OHBM, but that only goes so far. But having sort of a consensus on principles or meta principles of how to do, what were the gaps, how to do the best research. Once again, it's sort of a matter of curating the ideas to help push the field. I like that. I think.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean the high dimensional statistical world that we live in is very different than the psychology of yesterday, right? Like that, and it's not just different from the perspective of, oh, now we need to be really pro coders that can schedule jobs on a cluster and yada yada yada. It's not that. It's from the statistical perspective. Like the curse of dimensionality. It means that in higher dimensional spaces, things are just harder to discern. Right. Yes. That's just like a fundamental element of how we're addressing these, like what we're trying to tackle here. So like, yeah, we thinking from that perspective, thinking of the perspective of the humbled perspective of the challenge of making discernment in high dimensional space is one that is not solved and is very difficult. And like, what are the things that we need to do in order to have a decent shot at being able to do that?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think and I think you're absolutely right. I think this is a group that can sort of bring people together on that question. There's other groups too, and there's certainly, and like you said, there's lots of discussion about it, but it's not ever, a sense that it's sort of, this consensus is reached slowly, and the information is disseminated incompletely. Things that are obvious that people should just know. That's evolving, and sort of being, having this group as a potential mechanism for, complementing the OHBM standards group or whatever. That's a little bit behind in some sense. This is sort of like information, best practices, information or advice or principles. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a lot of work to I mean, it's constantly it would be a living document, but I think that would be cool to keep that perspective, and sort of, that would certainly be a service to the field as well.
I mean, it's important to note also, it's not like these questions are solved outside of neuroimaging. These are these questions of how do we make discernment in high dimensional space is kind of the question of our era from a scientific perspective. Like everyone is struggling with the high dimensional, the dimensionality of our data, and it's not us alone. So, you know, we might have best practices, we might sort of coalesce, but for a large part, we're going to be getting some kind of trickle down information from the people in statistics departments and machine learning departments who are really on the cutting edge of understanding how to do this in a way. But the thing that we bring, I think, to the table that's different is that unlike like this stats departments and the machine learning, you know, folks, we're thinking about like, well, how does the rubber meet the road actually? Like when you want to actually take a clinician, make a diagnosis, and then associate that with the neuroimaging measurement, like the sort of looking from the perspective of the like the people who do the standards and measurement, the international standards and measurement community, like there's specific thing, they mean very specific things with reliability and reproducibility and you know, like that we are also trying to like understand, because we eventually ourselves want to be able to make statements like you know, prognosticate some kind of thing based on some neuroimaging measurement or some cluster of neuroimaging and other data forms or something like that. Yeah, it's an evolving conversation, I think, that hopefully we all continue to have, but I think putting that conversation in primacy in the putting it on the pedestal that it deserves, I think is really important in order for us as a community to be maximizing our scientific impact over the long term.
Yeah, I agree. And we haven't even mentioned, right, that like you suggested, right, I mean, real clinical impact of neuroimaging biomarkers. I mean, that doesn't exist yet. And, you know, people don't have a good intuition why exactly. There's reasons why, and you suggest them. And I think it's worth, yeah, the more we're on board about, you know, what the issues are, the faster we'll find solutions in this regard. But I can't, and like I said, there's a lot of discussion, but I agree with you. I think that there's enough coalescence of, you know, sizing up the problem. Like you said, the curse of multidimensionality. Most people wouldn't really think of that off the top of their head as the big problem. It would be like, oh, that's kind of, you know, stuff we have to do.
Not an interesting academic sidebar, you know, that's not, not that. It's like a fundamental issue.
Yeah. And I think having that point, having more people aware of that. I mean, this is sort of like this group, or in general, it would be interesting to think about how to raise that issue such that it is on top of people's heads and how they solve that. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of what we're actually talking about this year is not technical issues. So, you know, I'm spouting on and ranting about these technical elements, but I think really we're in a moment right now in history where the social, cultural roadblocks of open science are more important, because these technical things, everybody needs to address them, and they'll get addressed over time when really smart people work on them. But there's social, cultural issues of, you know, lack of diversity, inclusivity, lack of appropriate incentive structure, all of these kinds of things that like the faster we need to address these things really, really like as soon as possible.
Yeah, I totally agree. And go on, Melvin. Yes.
Yeah, I also agree that for the better technical solutions, we need people. And we need a non-traditional definition of scientists. So with that brainstorming, we will be able to tackle that hard questions. That's my note.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, and I do think, you know, it's interesting that you sort of emphasize the importance of the social problems, and I kind of agree. I mean, the whole social landscape of the world is not just something that necessarily just kind of progresses. It's like people suggest that we're in a state where it's extremely volatile, and the more we can sort of reach out and sort of spread a net of like, okay, we're all sort of on the same game, at least in the context of science or brain science, that might help. You know, it might help the big picture in terms of, you know, people worry about having a total split of like, you know, Western culture versus whatever, and it doesn't have to be that way. And you're right, there might be important time periods now to do something, be much more proactive about this sort of thing. So, absolutely.
And I think we have the best shot of solving some of these like hard problems by just getting more people working on them, right? Many hands make light work, many brains, hopefully minds too.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. On that note, this has been a great discussion. I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything else about at least what they're doing or what, any sort of hopeful thoughts. But I think that this has been a great discussion, not only about what Open Science Special Interest Group does, but about what you have been doing, about the big problems and the big challenges of today. So definitely look forward to the meeting and seeing how you are manifest with that, and look forward to future meetings to see how things work. So, all right, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.